Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to another GBSN cross-border webinar. Today's webinar is the finale of our three-part series on business schools and the call to community action. We've got 3 GBSN member schools sitting on a panel today with our CEO, Dan LeClair. We have Kedge Business School, FIU from Florida, and FDC in Brazil, so we are very excited. Before we get started though, just a couple of housekeeping tasks. You as webinar participants are muted during the duration of the webinar. This will be a live discussion, so please we encourage you to submit your questions and comments through the Q&A function and the chat function on your toolbar at any moment during the webinar. Dan, who is moderating the discussion, will try and get everyone's questions and comments answered throughout the webinar. This webinar is also being recorded, so you will receive the recording of the webinar after the conclusion. So without further ado, I will hand it over to the Global Business School Network CEO, Dan LeClair.
Thanks so much, Maddie. I appreciate the introduction very much. Let me just add my welcome to Maddie's and emphasize how important that we think this series of webinars is for GBSN. We at GBSN have a vision that the developing world has the management talent it needs to generate prosperity in an inclusive and sustainable sense. And for us, that means how do we deploy, how do we channel the energy of business schools into our communities in a meaningful way? So as you can note from that mission, that vision, that this kind of work that we're going to talk about today is very important to GBSN. So as I've said, this particular set of webinars, even if one school is inspired to do something differently that helps part of its community in a small way, it's been worth doing. And we just appreciate the willingness of the folks on this one, but also on all of them to come on board and talk with us about this. Now we have, I think, an all-star panel today. I've noted that on my LinkedIn profile. I know each of the panelists pretty well. I'm going to abbreviate their introductions and leave it to you to explore more about them on their bios. What shows up better in their bios is more about them than about their schools. So I'd like to just say in each case something interesting about the schools, if I may, rather than just the individuals. We'll start with Tashina Giraud. Is a Director of International Operations and Relations at the Kedge Business School. And as we noted in a conversation just prior to logging on, Kedge Business School is quite a bit bigger than we all think in many ways. And it was started, if I remember correctly, Tashina, it was started in a merger by 2 already well-known business schools in Marseille and Bordeaux, yeah. And that was, what, about 11 years ago?
It was in 2013, so not quite so.
Not quite 10 years ago. Well, I'm sure we'll hear more about Kedge Business School, but one of the things that I learned about Tashina very early on, I think we met in Casablanca, if I remember correctly, and that she's been very involved with West Africa in her early experience in sustainable development. And I'm sure that'll influence some of her conversation. We have Joanne, who I've known for actually quite a bit of time. I knew her back when she was at Dayton. But I tell you what, she's done a fantastic job here in Florida, putting FIU Business School on the map, as we say. And I think that largely has to do with her experience internationally. FIU, I think, is also one of these schools that we often don't think of enough because they are ranked very highly in international business. I think number 2 in international business at the undergraduate level, if I recall correctly. but I think they also, due to Joanne's leadership, operate at the intersection between Latin America and Asia in many ways, which is, I think, an interesting combination of Joanne's experience, but also the strengths of the school. And I'm sure that will show up also in our discussion today. Then we have Viviane. Viviane Barreto is Associate Dean for Global Strategy at the FDC, Fundação Cabral. I'm never quite convinced I pronounced that correctly. But I've had the pleasure of working with FDC. I was at their last International Advisory Council, and I can say with no hesitation that this is a school fundamentally committed to Brazil and their communities, but also on providing leadership internationally on inclusive development. So we're anxious to hear about the work that you've been doing in the context of COVID-19. So I'm going to stop there and just ask each one of our panelists to do a quick round, because what I found is that in any webinar today, the first thing people want to know is what's happening. You know, and one of the benefits of GBSN is we get to find out what's happening this morning in France, South Florida, and in Brazil in a quick way. So if you could just touch on what's happening in your country and local city, but more importantly, where's your school at in this process of dealing with the crisis and potentially reopening? Maybe we could start with you, Viviane, down in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Dan. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be joining this conversation this morning. Let me give you some of the numbers about Brazil. We have already almost 900,000 confirmed cases of COVID in Brazil, and we already have almost 44,000 deaths. In the last 24 hours, we had 627, and well, last week we had about 1,200 deaths. So I hope that the number goes down. But I think it is important to bring another number, that is the Brazilian population, so people can have a better idea of the proportion. We have 210 million people in Brazil. And to understand the impact of COVID in Brazil, it is very important to understand what is going on in the 27 states that we have here. So they've been impacted differently. So the main impact was in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and also in the states of the northeast of Brazil, and also in Pará, in the north region. FDC, we have the main campus in the state of Minas Gerais that was impacted, but not so much. But we also have another campus in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and we have affiliates in all the states here in Brazil. So it was different the way that it was impacted. And also the way that FDC works, I'm not sure if you have those details, but we are mostly focused on executive education. 2/3 of our operation is in exec ed. And we have 27,000 executives coming to our programs each year. So we didn't have that challenge of undergrad students and how we would send them back home. Mostly what we had to do was to adapt from online, from face-to-face to online, and to make sure that we would deliver the value proposition in virtual online way. So that's
That's a great introduction. And why don't we move to you, Joanne, and then we'll go to Tashina. And then when we get to Tashina, we'll leverage that as a launch point for some of our initiatives. Joanne?
Thank you, Dan, and good day to everyone participating today. It was good to catch up with everybody. And I'm indebted to Dan's nice introduction, quite humble by that. Florida International University College of Business, we call it FIU Business, located in sunny Miami, Florida. And we currently have around 77,000 cases in Florida, with the weekend probably perk up a little bit. And before everyone joined, our panelists were discussing, and I wonder whether it has something to do with our more systematic testing of cases in here. And right now in Florida, we already enter what we call the phase 2. Actually, phase 2 started on June 5th. And all counties in the state of Florida have already opened up, meaning that, restaurant can open up with limited capacity, regular thing that you can imagine, like barber shop, nail salon, they're all open up with limited capacity to observe the social distancing. But FIU located in Miami-Dade County. It is one of the 3 counties that are kind of like not really quite there yet. But we do anticipate phase 3 probably will start hopefully in fall, when we can bring the students back. And FIU, or Florida International University, is the number 4th largest university in the United States, with roughly 58,000 students. And FIU Business itself is the largest business school in the state of Florida, with around 11,000 students. On May 28th, our governing body that govern all the 12 public universities, called the Board of Governors in the state of Florida, presented what we call the preliminary framework of opening up all the public university to the governor. So the chancellor presented a framework, and there are several things that talk about not only personal responsibility, but how universities really get ready. Should we open up the university during phase 3 by fall semester, that anticipated to be end of August. And by June 23rd this month, all 12 public universities will present its own version of reopening the campus. So for some of the audience that participating today, understanding that FIU is actually in Miami, an urban university, is vastly different from, for instance, University of Florida in Gainesville, very much a college town, and Florida State University in Tallahassee, the state capital, but also very much a college town. So our game plans will be very different from each other. And I don't think the Board of Governors anticipated us to have the same kind of thing. And mainly we focus on take personal responsibility for the care of the community. However, try to do what is right for your own university. And FIU does not currently, actually, it has not been talking about a compressed schedule or anything like that. And we don't believe one size fits all. We will create a game plan that is fit for our student body, and also with the care of our faculty, our staff, and all our visitors and volunteers.
Thank you, Joanne. It's a very important, I think, context setting that we'll come back to with this discussion. Tashina, I wonder if you could provide a similar introduction to where you're at in France and with education in particular, but use that as a launch point for talking about really how you came to know early about what's happening around the world, but also how that positioned you to respond to assist at least part of your community right away.
Well, thank you, Dan, for the introduction. And I'm very happy to be here today with such a wonderful panel of ladies as well. Kedge Business, you said that Kedge Business School is quite a large business school in French size, in French standards. We have campuses where I'm located in Marseille, Bordeaux, Paris, it's Toulon, but also we have campuses in China and in Dakar. So with a little under 13,000 students, not including all the executive education activities, it's a pretty large group for France, which also means that we are a global school. And given that it's part of our DNA, it's obligatory for our pre-experience programs to go abroad and have international experience. So at the time that COVID started, we had a little over 2,000 students abroad around the world doing exchange programs and internships and various projects. And because we have such a global community, we put in place a number of services, and the one that I guess is quite innovative for at least for in France is called Safety Kedge, which is an app that the students have in their their regular Kedge app, which allows them to help prepare their travels, but also in the event that they have an issue during their travels and during their national experience, that they can, or staff as well, we can use it. We can signal, and we have a hotline that gets called, and people are there to help find solutions and make sure you have the right emergency numbers, and basically help you along during your difficult times. But also serves that when there are problems around the world, a natural disaster, violence, something going on in an area, we can geolocalize our students and staff to see if there's any of our Kedgers, as we like to call it, in the area, and do a safety check and just say, are you okay? Do you need any assistance? Are things going all right? And so at the beginning, basically, COVID started as safety checks when we had the alerts coming up from SOS International saying there's this pandemic, there's an epidemic at the time in the Wuhan area. Well, we had students in Wuhan on exchange, and dual degree students. So we started by pinging Wuhan, pinging China, and then as it started growing, we started pinging the students on a wider basis. And of course, then managing, as Viviane said, where they are, how do they get home, what do we do, what are the government instructions, how do we help our students, how do we give them good advice, until it became a global pandemic, and then basically went into massive crisis management mode within the school, and started repatriating students and working with the different and helping them find the right government entities to do so. But it also made it so that we had, at the same time, we were digitalizing all the support services in our school. Within 1 week, we digitalized 8,500 classes with 600 professors, which was quite a leapfrog in this digital transition. But we also digitalized all the support services that we have in wellness, our psychologists, our volunteers that are trained, our support staff, or even our sports activities were all put online to keep working and helping our students. And while doing this, we were able to identify students who were coming to the school saying, we have no money anymore. Our jobs were paying us hourly. I can't afford to feed myself. Basically students coming and saying that they were going to be homeless if they didn't get help. And so Kedge has an emergency fund every year that we might use for some extraordinary cases. And so basically our foundation, instead of giving 20,000, well, put out 50,000, and we knew that wasn't going to be enough. And so Kedge doubled the amount in the emergency fund, which has now led to about 100, a little over 100 students who have used it, half of them being international students. But we said, well, money's just not enough. And so basically what's happened is little by little, this network, this web of community action started building, where we reached out to our alumni who are all around the world now and said, there are students in your area that need help. Who would be willing to give a helping hand during this crisis? And we had over 200 alumni all around the world who said, we can help someone. We have an extra room if they need housing, because some students found themselves homeless. It was really quite complicated time. And so we had this wonderful response from our alumni community. And at the same time, our students also were doing student-led projects to help students who are in isolation, to make them feel less disconnected, especially those who are far from their family in confinement all by themselves. We also had students who helped staff who have kids at home and had homeschool and didn't have time to do it. So we had students homeschooling our children. So in a way, it's a complete reverse community action from our students. But also the sports activities for students were open to alumni, free, as many people did, online workshops and activities given to the executive population, our alumni, helping certain alumni businesses that were struggling, like the winemakers. We have quite a good number of winemakers. So basically, we saw this multitude of community actions happening that became a web of community action, all facilitated through the different digital tools that we had, some accelerated, a lot of new activities that we didn't expect to do. So it kind of just became a big web.
That's perfect for an introduction and a launch point, I think, for the rest of the discussion. I'm going to come back to a question that I've noted about that, but I want to turn to Joanne and then come back to Viviane, because Joanne, I understand you did something fairly similar in terms of supporting students, and maybe we could use that as a starting point and for our discussion in the South Florida case.
Absolutely, and thank you, Dan. So as I mentioned earlier on, that FIU business is in Miami, is an urban city. Our student body is very much an urban student body, meaning that many of them are not residential students. So they live in a city and they come, even though we maybe have some portion of them actually living on campus. So as you can imagine, our student body very much likely is the first generation college student. So the lockdown, because of the COVID-19, creates tremendous financial stress on our student body. And what we have done as a university at Florida International University, we created something called the FIU Strong Emergency Fund. Now, but of course, as a business school, we would do a little bit more extra because we are the one that actually kind of concerned about our finance, economics, probably more so than most people, knowing what will happen to the state, what will happen to the country, that kind of thing. So shortly after the university went remote, starting on March 11, with the whole operation completely remote on March 16, that was a Monday, remember vividly, FIU Business created what we call the Dean's Destination Fund. The goal is very similar to originally when we started something called the Dean's Destination Scholarship. Our goal is to help the student to meet their financial need, making sure that they're going to stay in school and finish their degree. Because many of our students, as you can imagine, they lost their part-time job and maybe their family now is in financial jeopardy. So we expanded the scope to help our student, and it has been a fairly tough 3 months, I have to say to you, because often I would see a lot of students writing me email personally and asking, you know, is there any way that can help me to stay in school? But we're proud that the community get together. I want to give a shout out to the Dean's Advisory Council, the Dean's Board member. They answer our call and pull some money together. We're able to help some students, even though it's not all. So that is the student aspect. And I think I am going to stop here because you just asked me about a student right now.
Well, you've anticipated the return question that we'll want to address, and that is some of the work that you've been doing with SMEs in the region. But we'll come back to that. I want to turn now to Viviane down in Sao Paulo. We've talked many times over the last several months, Viviane, about all the things that FDC is doing. But if you could maybe focus on one or two of the initiatives that you think are most relevant to the COVID-19, that would be great. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Okay, then. FDC also worked to support its community, the faculty, the team members, and the clients. We renegotiated contracts. We tried to help people when they needed most. And another thing that we did was we have been discussing a lot about what is the role of business schools. If business schools are being agents of progress, or if business schools are increasing the social gap that we have, the social inequality. And being in a context like in Brazil, it is extremely important to reflect about that. So when we had the COVID outbreak here in Brazil, like in the other countries, the people, the underfavored, they were hit stronger. The people who have their very small business, who used to sell candies in front of the schools, they don't have kids to buy anymore. So we already had some experience with small entrepreneurs in FDC programs. And we had some content developed to be delivered online. And we tried to figure out what could be the best support that FDC could bring. So we created the initiative that is called Pra Frente. It's called, in English, it would be like forward. And we aim to transform the life of 1 million informal entrepreneurs. How? Articulating the network that we have at FDC. So we created a platform so we could connect to potential informal entrepreneurs that would need help. We also invited the FDC alumni and people somehow connected to FDC, organizations who are clients of FDC. So first thing was to organize this ecosystem to provide help to the informal entrepreneurs. And then that was very, very important because it's not easy for FDC or for a business school that has mostly executives coming to our programs to connect with the bottom of the pyramid. And we have like some of our donors, for example, that has, he always provoked like, what is FDC going to do for the bottom of the pyramid? So long story short, what we did was to connect with those people that needed help. So just one quick example so you can figure out what kind of support we are providing. There is the largest favela in São Paulo. It's called Paraisópolis, and they had an article on that in the edition of the Washington Post last week. And in that slum, they created the presidents of the streets. So they have 400 presidents of streets in the Paraisópolis favela. Who is a president of the street? For example, a 24-year-old single mother that has a very, very small business there, informal, and she is going to do what the government doesn't do. She manages the whole street. She manages around 70 families to survive and overcome the coronavirus outbreak. So, for example, one of them had a very small business where she used it to cook 300 lunch boxes a day. With the coronavirus outbreak, her business went from 300 lunch boxes to 10,000 lunch boxes a day. So we are helping her to be prepared for this growth that happened very quickly, because now they have more people in the favela, or people that were eating somewhere else, they are staying there. And the wonderful thing about social entrepreneurship is that it creates growth to the community. So she is hiring other women from the community, she's buying the raw material from the community, and what we are doing is to support the growth. We've been learning so much. In the beginning, we thought that they needed management concepts. No way. They don't want education, they want money. And we need to show that we can help them and bring results very quickly. It's like teaching how to fish, you know. And it's amazing because we realized that first thing we needed to bring support on behavior, like to help them with self-esteem, with protagonism, of dignity. After that, we have room to bring management concepts in a very, very simple way. So that's a little of the program, and I'll be happy to tell you later on about the numbers and the reaction. But what is the main thing, that if we want to talk about entrepreneurship, it has to be an ecosystem. We need to help them get funding, credit, knowledge, and keep the wheel turning.
Thanks for that, Viviane. Tashina, I'm gonna keep you on hold for just a moment longer, because this is a really good opportunity to come back to Joanne and ask her to continue on this question about supporting small and medium-sized business, if not micro business, and what you've done.
Certainly, Dan. So FIU Business houses one of the small business development center within the network of the state of Florida. And SBDC, I think many of you will know, it's a state designated as a Florida's principal provider of any kind of business assistance. So FIU Business supports some budgetary and also provides spaces for our SBDC. And through our SBDC, we were able to help many small businesses to get nearly $25 million in loans and other financial assistance at this date at no charge, because that is, what the SBDC is for. And then consultant will continue to provide no-cost counseling for small businesses as they move through the pandemic. So I would say the SBDC has done a fantastic job, and they have been working tirelessly through our director, Brian Van Hoek. And because United States has a CARES Act, and out of the CARES Act, a portion of it is dedicated to some of the Small Business Development Center. And I know that, like Viviane was talking about, it's really the small businesses that matter. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, and I'm sure you read some of the Wall Street Journal talking about even Wuhan, the finance chief is asking, guys, you can build up your own little street vendor, try to make a livelihood out there. So we believe that the important work of SBDC is one of the things that will bring the economy back. If we have to enter phase 3, we really have to support the Small Business Development Center. Is that what you're looking for?
Exactly. I understand it was about that you've been able to secure a little more than $20 million for this kind of support.
About 25 million. Yeah.
25 million.
Yeah.
That's great. As we can see, the financial part becomes a pretty important dimension, especially given the uncertainty regarding how businesses receive and can use these kinds of funds. Let's go back to Tashina. I wonder if you might comment a little bit on that kind of work with SMEs, but also we can then shift gears and talk a little bit about what Viviane mentioned, and that is our perhaps disproportionately impacted communities. And I wonder if at that point we can shift down to Senegal after you comment on the questions about SMEs.
That was very interesting, Joanne. I was quite interesting to hear what an impactful program that you have. I would start to say that France is a bit different than the US in the way that we structure our corporate donors and activities we do with our businesses. But of course, as a business school, our connections with the local businesses and small businesses are very important because our students are entrepreneurs. In fact, Kedge was just ranked the #1 entrepreneurial school in France. And this week, we just announced the opening of a new thing that I'm translating as I go, called the Entrepreneurial School, which is going to be specifically, as of November, we're opening it for young people under 30 who have at least just a high school degree, but not more necessarily, from those underprivileged areas and target areas, because we know that in France, one of our big issues is going to be employability for our newly graduated students, people who have not had education. We're entering into a new phase of what we're going to, as you said, need entrepreneurs, not just people who are asking for unemployment. And so with a number of local partners, including the employment agencies and different, the foundation of Auteuil in France, we're opening up this entrepreneurial school for specifically these underprivileged populations. And we can still call them this because we are typically not the students that enroll in business schools in France. And as much as we try, and we have these scholarship programs and special loan programs for these students, we know that a lot of them don't continue necessarily their studies or might not launch themselves into entrepreneurial activities so easily, because there's a lot of I wouldn't say bureaucracy, but a lot of administrative steps to take into account in order to launch yourself in a business. And as you say, even despite being in France, there is a bit of informal activity as well that can be transformed into businesses and small businesses, and then maybe even larger businesses. So the work that we've been doing with our alumni, specifically in our business communities is we've been continuing to do the types of education and activities accompanying them throughout the crisis, and in free trainings of how to be a leader during a crisis, how to manage different types of activities in a crisis, because we thought that's something that we should give back to the community, that we're not going to have them paying for all these lessons right now when we know these are immediately needed to learn how to do. For example, there was a great webinar by one of our professors on managing, being a good manager during a crisis in which you're isolated from your teams. And so what we could do is give back to them in this way. And as you can see, we're launching now specific programs for these target communities to help promote entrepreneurship. Because honestly, if we're looking at the statistics that could be in front of us, in France, we have a high unemployment rate with young under 30 compared to the United States, much higher. And so we're looking at what's going to be happening. We also doubled our work apprenticeship program places. So those are places that companies pay for the student studies, and they alternate between working and being at school. And so we could only do that as well because we have such a great community of businesses and alumni who are willing to hire and take on those work study contracts. And so we've doubled them for the upcoming year in spots, positions inside the school. So it's not an easy thing. And, you know, student loans can't solve everything, but we're also, just like Joanne said, we do not receive the public funding that allows us to provide a free education to the students. And so we do what we can to eliminate the barrier and then help promote entrepreneurship within and without the school, within all of our communities.
Can you comment? This is great. I've now noted about 4 big takeaways across the different conversations, and those will inform some questions as we go. But just if you could maybe just shift gears a little bit to Tashina. I was interested, like many people are, in what you're doing in Africa. And at the moment, there's, I guess, rising concern. There's always been concern, but also rising optimism about how we're able to deal with this crisis, both health-wise and economically in parts of Africa. And I'm wondering if you found any of your experience, for example, in China and in France, helpful in understanding what you're doing or applying what you're doing in Senegal or in Dakar.
It was a very interesting difference in the way that the crisis was managed in the different campuses and the different contexts. As you know, we share activities with BEM Dakar, which as we talked about with Dan, is a local institution that we're also working with and building programs and activities with them in campuses. They actually were very agile. Yes, there are difficulties in Africa linked to infrastructure, sometimes internet or electricity issues within the cities, but they took it very seriously and completely digitalized their courses as well. And they might not have had all the resources and the learning management systems that we were using in France or in China, but they used the choices that we made and worked with them and that they made specifically were very effective to students. Because that's what to think about. Maybe people will be using their telephone instead of a really great fiber connection. How do you manage exams? We brought a platform called Manage Exam, actually, to help them for a couple of our courses, because we have to have it be completely the same standards no matter which continent we're on. And so we want to have the same exam system, and to be able to help manage exams cross-continental. And we chose, though, not to have the facial recognition cheating technology, which we could have done. We chose specifically not to do that, and we're very happy that we did not choose that option. But they did a really good job. The difficulty is for them is they're saying people live in the streets. How do you do confinement when people are living in the streets? You say you're having confinement. Well, it's kind of like a somewhat semi-confinement where some people are being confined and some people are not confined. And Then there were rumors of how COVID didn't really impact Africans for different reasons by certain even members of the political areas. And so people were saying, oh, COVID is, not an African disease. And so they had a large, like very different reality. But in the end, our colleagues and the people we know working in Africa, a lot of researchers are working hard night and day, just like all around the world on the COVID responses, and working together in cross-country research initiatives throughout West Africa that go through francophone and anglophone situations. And so what we've seen is the rise of new collaborations and sharing of knowledge and creating knowledge, but also now they're saying that it might be they haven't been testing as much as in other places, and so the numbers maybe are not quite reflective of the reality, but they seem to be being quite resilient to it, and they're keeping an extraordinarily positive attitude. I can't say the same jokes that they do about all the different types of diseases that they have to deal with on a daily basis, but they've been doing a great job. And honestly, all the professors who are doing the cross-continental teaching, who couldn't go and teach on campus because of this, have all said that it's been a good experience for all of us, and it's maybe helping them to up their game in digital transformation.
Right. Thanks for sharing that with us, Tashina. And I think this opportunity with such international folks on the line is an important one to cover a lot of territory. But I'm going to go back to Viviane because we have a question, and I think you hinted at this in one of your points earlier on. Your point was related to this need to focus more on the individual and the behaviors and the perspective initially, and less on the management techniques and strategy. And the question that we have is that, interestingly, not specific to COVID, but in general, it seems that the business schools are constantly under an existential crisis. And that is whether it's a company or an educational institution, in the sense that, do we provide technical training, or do we educate and develop the humanity in people? And I thought just you again hinted at that in the initial point. Maybe you just comment on it, and then we could switch over to Joanne, who might offer a comment, and then I have a question for her.
Thank you, Dan. That's a very good question. I think that these COVID times has been teaching us a lot about what really matters, right? At the end, we know that we all need to be healthy. We all want to be part of something. We want to have access to basic rights, and we want to be we want to see the people around in a good condition too, because it's not about me being well, fine, healthy, but the others in a different situation. And I think that it brings the idea of what really matters. And if we talk about business schools, this is, as I mentioned, this is a kind of discussion that we have very often here at FDC. We believe that the technical side is extremely important, but it will be managed and delivered and put in practice by a human. So it's all about humanity. People need to be sensible enough to understand what's happening. I think that we go back to the basics, that at the end, what do we really need to know and what do we really need to do? We need to listen to people. We need to understand what they want. And based on that, we will be able to elaborate the solution, the product, and so on. But we need to be connected to people. And here at FDC, we discuss a lot, and we believe that we need to help the executives. Most of the people who attend our programs, they are executives. We need to help them understand that the biggest purpose of business is to create a better world and benefit society. And it's not something different, that it's just one thing or the other, or you make money or you benefit society. No, it's all one place. And we believe in the numbers, the studies, they show that the more that you're connected to that, the best results you have in your business. So, but we believe that we need to discuss it more, and it would be very good to have more schools engaged in this kind of discussion and action. So I think that we could be a force for good.
It's very good. You used a word earlier that I think underlies or underscores some of the things you just said, and that's the word dignity. And I think just listening to Tashina and Joanne, that idea of dignity and humanity underlies the efforts that both of your schools have as well. And I hope, Andre, that becomes a worthy response to your question. I'll let Joanne comment on that, but then I want to move quickly into a different question that I think is also important to address.
Thank you, Dan. So I agree with Viviane, but I have to say, Andre, this is a very intelligent question you asked, right? I'm going to invite the attendees to think this way. Do you think business school run like a company, or should we continue our mission? But I want to make sure that I want to clarify very, very importantly. The business school mission remains the same. Our goal is to invoke intellectual curiosity, to foster system thinkers while we actually develop future workforce. That is always the mission of the business school. We are going to still teach, financial statement. We're going to still teach about all the financial modeling, all the management skill. There's no doubt about it. Now, but if you ask, well, do you think like you're a CEO, you have to run it like a company? Now, because we're public university, if I tell you that our goal is not to make money, I hope you believe me. But that being said, to have the financial viability is absolutely important. That goes back to the early on before we started this webinar, Dan and the other panelists and I were talking about, we still have to be financially viable, and what incentive does a business dean have will dictate how the dean is going to operate the school. Now in FIU business itself, the finance model actually nurtures in some way, for our senior leadership team to think that, hey, absolutely important, we have to hold our operation steady, making sure that we have a sustainable enrollment, making sure that all classes that we promise we will honor, not only because it is important to keep our promise, the integrity of the business school relies on what we provide a student as we advertise and market it, but more importantly is truly, this is a commitment to the student body. What they want us is to show up for them. So while we say that in such a glamorous term, the financial viability is still a very major concern for a business school that probably rely on itself to make the operation work. We don't really receive substantial central support, and I think it's not really an unknown fact. A lot of business schools in the United States pretty much, have to really sustain their own operation, making sure that enrollment will happen in graduate level, making sure that enrollment will happen in undergraduate level. That kind of nurture us to almost function like a private school in that way.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm gonna, before I ask that topic changing question, I want to just make sure I asked Tashina if she wanted to comment on that. I sensed that there's a possibility. If you want to just take a moment.
Well, there's a French philosopher, Morin, who just came out with a new article saying that we need to learn how to navigate uncertainty if in the days that are to come and the years that are to come, because having these ideas where we can plan specific certainties are basically it's disappearing. And no matter what we're going through, we're also a nonprofit organization, but we're considered a private school. Our mission is to train responsible leaders that are open-minded and that are able to bring sustainable growth. And that mission doesn't change. And if we are going to be responsible, we also need to responsibly manage our schools. So we cannot depend on public money. We depend on our tuition fees. And as Joanne said, what the students want is that the day they have courses, that they be quality, that they learn what they need to learn, and that they're taught how to learn, is what we like to say, and help them find the right path for them, that they can be this positive actor in the change that is to come and in the growth that is to come. And I think that if we're all in this network together, we all agree that the way forward, we are stronger together, and it's through a sustainable growth for everyone, not just for the top, that we need to focus our efforts and our school training.
Thanks for that. And we had a comment, I think I'll call it a comment, from actually a colleague of Joanne's that asked, I think points to this larger question that may or may not change as a consequence of COVID. And that is this question about how businesses focus on shareholders versus stakeholders, and what we're learning as a consequence of COVID-19. We won't try to answer that question today. In fact, I might point you to a series of interviews that we've been doing at GBSN of deans and of business leaders, which often gets at that question about what's changing as a consequence of COVID-19. It's called the World After COVID series, and you can find it online. But I just want to ask Joanne a quick question, because I think it's worth exploring because of the panelists that we have. But after she addresses that, I want to go back to Viviane and Tashina, and then back to Joanne for final remarks. We're nearing the end, and I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to sum up some of the things you learned from the others, as much as some of the things you learned from just exploring the questions. Joanne, the other schools are what I would describe as standalone business schools, right? I realize that there may be other ways of thinking about that matter, but FIU is part of, the business school is part of a larger institution. And I'm wondering if you're finding opportunities to collaborate as a consequence of what's happening now, and especially your drive to support your communities. And if you could just comment on that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan. So you're absolutely correct. FIU Business is within Florida International University, and Florida International University, FIU, is a comprehensive university. That means we have all the professional school, like business, medicine, law. We also have engineering, nursing, public health, arts and science, education. So as you can imagine, in a big operation, sometimes we do have opportunity to create collaboration. But I'll tell you a little bit about just the business school itself. Because we have partners in different parts of the world, for instance, through the business school partnership with some of our Chinese partners, we're able to, procure face mask, face covering, whatever you call it, or PPE, from China all the way to the area hospital. And then some of our faculty actually was very concerned about the short of supply initially when we first started during the lockdown. And they created a funding opportunity, asking people for donation. Our faculty put their money together and we buy gears to supply to some local hospital. And I'm very proud that our committee get together. And then also, I would say that through the engineering and also our charter and architecture and design, and they have created face shield, use like a little plastic thing in front of you to be part of the PPE. And our engineering school recently also worked through the university, and also different kind of business ventures to create a ventilator that is a lot easier to use and now in production. So there are many things that we have done. And also FIU itself is a testing ground that people can drive through and the community can ask for an appointment and they can be tested. So we also, as a business school, create a partnership with our public health college and through our student leaders, and they create something called the Brave Zone. And I think one of the things that we didn't really touch on today is talk about the mental wellness of all our constituency, our stakeholders, right? And I think that nobody would debate that. I think the mental stress has been very concerning. And even though I said it many times, cabin fever is not really a medical term, but I think the symptoms are very real. So the students are going to partner up with our student, are going to partner up with the Public Health College to create a brave zone for their own fellow student. And through the help of some of the public health professional to talk about issues that they're dealing with and how they can get out after this pandemic, how they can eventually gradually transition back to normalcy.
Thanks, Joanne. It's very interesting to uncover even more that the business school is doing when it comes to collaborating. Why don't we start with you, Tashina? Some wrap-up remarks. We have about 4 minutes left, and I know you even mentioned some initial ideas about mental health in your comments. But how would you wrap up what we've learned today in just a few words for the audience?
I would say that as isolated as this crisis has forced us to become, it's forced us to go beyond our natural barriers and our comfort zones to create new ways to outreach into our communities. We have been stakeholder focused for a long time. I think our last symposium was in 2010, really saying stakeholders, and we don't have shareholders, but we need to provide people who have that approach. And just like with Joanne, our design school, we're creating advisors in the maker community to provide for the healthcare community, because we had massive shortages in France as well. And as you said, all those different activities that we've been doing as a community really made us grow stronger despite the isolation. And at the same time have forced us to rethink about what is important and what the next steps are going to be in our business models, in what we're going to be teaching our students. I think the most interesting question now that we should be talking to each other about is, how is this going to affect positively or negatively the missions that we have to carry out, the heart of our mission, which is really providing this quality, responsible education to our students. And how will all of this affect the services that we're delivering, but also the realities in which our students are going to have to live. The violence happening in the US right now, the different protests. We've had actual police violence protests in France in support and in response. And it's all very complicated, but this has brought to light so many different things that we not necessarily wanted to be showing. So what's next is the main question, and that we should do it as a community, and we shouldn't let go of all these links that we've made, all these webs that have been put together, and the nets that have been tossed out, and that we should keep working together to reinvent the next steps of the after COVID.
Thanks, Tashina. Viviane, final remarks?
Thank you, Dan. Well, listening to you, it's very clear for me that we all must go beyond. At FDC, we also live on what we earn, so we need to provide very high quality programs. So we are going to be interesting for the market and everything. And we try to do the best we can by reaching, for example, the CEOs of the largest companies here in Brazil. They are now engaged in one of our projects that is called the CEO's Legacy. So we invite them to be part of the solution. So what's going to be your legacy? And everyone has something to do. And we can do much more than we think we can do. And just going back to the question of what is the role of business school, it is impossible that you come to an MBA, executive MBA program at FDC or in one of the other schools, and it's great that you can afford, you're going to have a very good program, but it is unacceptable that you leave FDC knowing that 13.8 million Brazilians live on less than $1.9 a day and think that it's normal. we need kind of to shake people, that's not normal. We cannot accept that. And what each one of us is going to do to be agent of change.
Thanks so much, Viviane, and thanks for mentioning the word beyond. I encourage all of you to look out from GBSN for more about that word coming out soon. Joanne, final remarks?
Thank you, Dan. So early on, Dan mentioned FIU at this point, FIU Business particular, at this point already garnished 9 of the top 10 programs in the world, including our recent ranking as number 9 by the QS World University in our professional MBA. But ranking aside, fantastic. FIU Business loves to be recognized not only by its rankings, but also by its commitment to our people. The commitment to our students, faculty, staff, and our community is very important to us. And I do believe as teachers, educational institution, our goal is to lead. And I hope that through our bravery, courage, after the lockdown, we shall continue to show other people what business school, what FIU Business can provide, is that we can bring people back to normalcy.
Thank you, Joanne. And thanks to all 3 of you for not only doing this with us this morning, but for your leadership and helping business schools continue to make a difference in your communities. It's outstanding, to say the least, and we appreciate you sharing with us. And we say goodbye to all. Look for the next webinar from GBSN. I'll have a conversation on the 25th, I think, with Mike Barger at the University of Michigan about project-based learning and how that's changing in this context. So look forward to seeing all of you soon. And thank you again, Tashina, Viviane, and Joanne for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Dan,
Bye-bye.
for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much.